Joining us now is Chauncey Dandridge, DJ and event producer at Stonewall Inn and activist and member with Friends of Hart Island about efforts underway to remember the forgotten dead. Welcome to the show, Chauncey.
Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm all right. And just for full disclosure, I met Chauncey through Dance Parade New York.
Yep.
And we've been allies and colleagues since then. And it's always great to see him in his tutu and his dance police outfits.
It's been over 10 years, right?
Yeah. And we're coming up to the 20th this year, or next year. Yeah,
in May.
So I wanted to have you on your show because a lot of people have heard about Hart Island, but they probably don't know the whole history. And I was, very interested in what you were trying to do because this is where, of course, is Potter's Field, which is where, unfortunately, where people with no family, or there is family but they don't know, they often end up after they've passed away. So can you tell me where Hart Island is and what it is and what goes on there?
It's basically a public cemetery that I don't know all the history. About a month and a half ago, the page Friends of Hart Island followed me on Instagram, and I was like, "What is this?" And I'd heard over the years about it, but it got me so intrigued and so, obsessed with it in a way. It felt like a calling. It's basically the place where a lot of the people during the AIDS crisis were buried when their family had disowned them. There was no money to have them buried. So there's a lot of, lost souls there from the AIDS epidemic. A lot of people were buried there from the COVID epidemic. And it's usually a place where if you can't afford to bury your loved one, it's kind of where their final resting place is. And there's been, there's been lots of talks of of how to increase access to, if your loved one is buried there, you can't just go and visit. Hart Island is basically a small island off the coast of the Bronx. It's kind of near City Island. And it's wild that City Island is kind of a little touch of Cape Cod. It's very, it's very Connecticut, it's very Boston, and it's very, affluent. And then you have right across the way this, it's dubbed as the loneliest place in New York. So that was very chilling for me to read that. And it just, I don't know, I grew up I came out of the closet and kind of started hanging out in the village, like when the AIDS crisis was in full throttle, but not the 80s, but more like the 90s. So I knew a lot of people who were positive. I knew a lot of people who had passed. So it spoke to me in that way. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to landmark the island so they can increase access. They can increase beautification and just overall tending of the environment there.
And you recently did a fundraiser at the Stonewall Inn to help the Friends of Hart Island.
Yes, Friends of Hart Island, and Hart is spelled H-A-R-T. Everybody thinks it's H-E-A-R-T. But Elsie from Hart Island has both her father and her brother buried there. Her father passed away back in the early 90s. It's a small organization, but what they're really trying, it's very grassroots. They're trying to get just more attention to the place and more, like I said, access. Because there was talks of exhuming the graves and building a school on the island, and that's just completely disrespectful and just wild that it's even contemplated. But and if you want to go visit, there's a very short window of time every month. They just started, I believe, in 2023 with a monthly or bi-monthly tour where, the park rangers will show you around the island. But, if your loved one is buried there, you can't just get on a ferry and go visit them, so it's a little shocking to me.
And I understand also that there's a great quantity of children buried there. I mean, this happens when, unfortunately, the child doesn't survive birth.
Yeah.
And it's what's known as a city burial, which sounds one thing, but then if people knew that that meant Potter's Field, I think this would have a different reaction.
Exactly. Yeah, we did an event on the day on Dia de los Muertos on the day after Halloween at the Stonewall Inn. We did kind of a storytelling event. Some people sang some songs. It was just kind of more of like a moment of togetherness, and we played some fun music and just kind of shared the space with one another. We're working on more events and more awareness building events in the future, where we have some performances and just more of like a cohesive event. But this is a really great way to introduce and get people aware, because a lot of people I know have never heard of it, or they heard of it but they didn't know much about it. And it's part of the history of New York, and being that we just came off of our last epidemic of COVID, and a lot of people were buried there that didn't were abandoned, or like the family couldn't be reached, or so it's I think that kind of awakened what was going on there. But I it's one of those things. I don't know. I mean, I've been an activist most of my life, but sometimes things just come my way and I just become like, not obsessed, but I just become like, oh, I need to do something about this. So I've joined the team recently, and I'm going to meet with them regularly, and we're going to try to build up just more awareness, get the petition closer to its goal. If you go to friendsofhartisland.com, the petition is right there. You could sign up. It takes like about 30 seconds the most. And their Instagram is Friends of Hart Island as well. So yeah.
Right. So I understand there's like a million people buried there. And of course, yes. I do remember the shocking footage of what reality is because it's there are mass burials, right? Because there's no money for separate burials. And we saw footage of that during COVID because, of course, the morgues were overflowing.
Yeah,
I mean, they had to store people in ice vans, and and then they were sending them out to Hart Island.
And the correlation between when the AIDS crisis hit and COVID was the whole, like people didn't want to touch the bodies, people didn't want to be near the people who were sick. Like the correlation was kind of uncanny,
Yeah. All right, Chauncey. So just give out the name of the site again.
Sure.
People can join this petition that would preserve and aim for landmark protection.
Yeah, they're trying to add like a visitor center, and just when people get there, they've gotten rid of some buildings that were kind of dangerous and not up to code, and old buildings. And they're trying to increase like a ferry system and all that. But it's Friends of Hart Island, Friends of HartIsland.com, and their Instagram. They're slowly building up their Instagram. It's also Friends of Hart Island, it's just really like, it's personal. I don't know anyone on the island. I don't know anyone buried on the island. But there's such a personal, like, you should be able to grieve properly. You should be able to visit your loved one. Anyone in my family that's been buried, I know that I can go and visit them if I want. But like, this is almost like a restriction because of, a class issue in a way,
Yeah. Good point. Chauncey Dandridge, thank you very much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Rebecca. It's good to see you.